This meeting is called to order. We'll have a moment for prayer or reflection. Thank you.
First up, we have adoption of the agenda. I've received a number of changes. Councillor Knodel has added Resolution 12.2 under new business, moving that item to be addressed after 5.1. Moving item 10.1 to be addressed after 12.2. Item 6.1 is deferred to another city council meeting. Item 6.3 is withdrawn. Madam Chair, do you have anything else to add?
Just with respect to the withdrawal of item 6.3. So that item was already accepted for information at our previous council meeting. And the Public Services Committee had determined to send it back for further feasibility work on that item. So we are going to withdraw it from this agenda.
And as well, item 9.1 will be dealt with directly after 6.2.
Thank you. Are there any other additions? Okay, so we will adopt the agenda as amended. And then moving on to adoption of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions?
I motion to accept.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. Okay, seeing no errors or omissions, we will adopt the agenda minutes.
Next up, we have item 12.2 from Councillor Knodel, the Northwest Industrial Area Recreational Club's motion.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would like to make a motion in regards to the Northwest Industrial Area Recreation Clubs. Whereas City Council directed administration to develop the Northwest Industrial ASP, whereas on March 7th, 2022, a public hearing was held and closed for Bylaw 4692, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to adopt the Northwest Industrial Area Structure Plan. And whereas at the public hearing, City Council heard the potential impacts that the Northwest Industrial Area Structure Plan would have on the Northwest Industrial Area Recreation Clubs. And whereas City Council recognizes the city's long-term desire to transition the club lands to their intended industrial use while recognizing the clubs for their important contribution to community vibrancy. Therefore, be it resolved that the City Council directs administration through the City Manager to engage with individual Northwest Industrial Area Recreation Clubs to determine a mutually agreeable path forward that supports the long-term viability of the clubs, and further, be it resolved that potential paths forward for each club may involve a defined lease extension up to 20 years and related terms and conditions, relocation prospects, or other such solutions that may be of interest to the clubs while simultaneously satisfying alignment with other long-term community growth plans.
I'll second that.
Any comments or debate on the motion? Councillor Dumanowski?
Well, Your Worship, it behooves us to speak to the motion that's at hand. Essentially, what you're seeing before council today is a partnership, an interest binding partnership with the clubs to say that we've heard you, and that your viability is important to this council. That your viability and your interests are of the interests of the community at large. At the same time, there are challenges as we move forward and grow and anticipate development in the heavy industrial, the Northwest industrial area, that we have the need to secure that in place for the viability of economic prosperity of our community. And so to reconcile one without the other is a challenge. And so what you see before you is an opportunity, and I will be supporting it to have staff, if it's, pardon me, approved by council, work with each of the recreational groups to, even though you've been consulted in the process of the ASP, this would be a different kind of conversation to have our city manager with our senior admin work with each of the rec groups to, with the backdrop of having up to a 20-year lease extension, which is what we heard. You want stability, you want the opportunity to move forward and have some security around that. That a lease extension up to 20 years will achieve that means. At the same time, staff will engage with each of the groups to identify a plan going forward. That may be a quick decision for some of you, and it might be a longer term, or maybe a really long-term strategy for others. But it really behooves council through admin to take the time to understand your individual needs, your prospects for future development and growth, and balance that against the needs of a growing community. And so I'm pleased that that this motion is before us, and that we are able to, I believe, reconcile both the need to grow as a community, but at the same time work with the rec clubs in the Northwest industrial area there, and mutually benefit the community going short-term, medium, and long-term. Thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
So I'll try to be really concise here. So as I look at the motion on the table, I think it's a good motion. It addresses everybody's needs and wants, but I believe it does so with limited comfort to those in the gallery. So I find that, I know we've got to progress, we've got to get more jobs, we need that industrial, but we also need our citizens and we need our rec facilities. And when I look at how we negotiate and how we do leases, I would like to think that we are the bigger party and we've got to be the ones that do better. So in my mind, I go, okay, well, if we just want to do phases 1, 2, and 3, and I've just been educated on this, so I didn't know this until about 10 minutes ago. City manager educated me, but if we wanted to just do phases 1, 2, and 3 and leave 4 out, that's going to be a cost to the citizens of Medicine Hat. So that's potentially not the best answer. However, then I look at it as somebody in business and I go, well, wait a minute. I was the governing body to begin with. I'm still the governing body. What can I do better? So even though this is, they're really, I think this motion really kind of addresses so many different things, I can't support it. It does not resonate with a long-term solution for me. I feel it's a very short-term, we're going to talk to you, but we still haven't talked to you. And in my mind, that's what the consultation was for, and maybe I've got that wrong. But to me, the consultation is to hear our citizens, take back what they said, and come back with a solution for all. And I feel like we're at the same place we were when we left 2 Mondays ago. So for that reason, I will not be supporting the motion.
Councillor Canoto?
Thank you, Mayor Clark, through the chair. So we sat here 2 weeks ago on March 7th, and one thing that I came into this position wanting to do was say and rather than or. And the reason for that is that this sort of decision-making affects not only you, but it affects our whole community. And we heard from you. We heard from you loud and clear how much value you place on these spaces and these clubs and how they affect you kind of at a soul level. So in making a proposal and a motion to speak forward on communicating with you further about what it looks like to have a mutual agreement and a mutual interest, a two-way street. That's why this was proposed. That's why I wanted to put this on the table. And I am hopeful that you know that as I approach something like this, and as council, we debate and discuss what's best for the community, that you know I want what's good for everyone. And that's truly at the core of what we are elected to do is serve the municipality as a whole. So I appreciate all of the insight that you've shared with us, and just know that it is my intention to serve everyone to the best of my ability.
Councillor McGrogan?
Thank you. Through the chair, so again, very appreciative of the public consultation and all the voices that we heard 2 weeks ago. I'm reminded of Mr. Stanky when he said that it's either yes or no. And why is it either yes or no? And to me, this creates some surety, this motion, that there can be something different than either yes or no. And I went out and toured the grounds over the last couple of weeks and thought long and hard about this, and very concerned about the quality of life of our citizens. And if this gives some surety that we do want the clubs to survive, we want them to thrive, that we will look for solutions, but the economy of Medicine Hat is also extremely important, and we need to consider it. And again, I'm going to quote Mr. Stanky again. He supported economic development, so how do you find that balance of both? And to me, this is an appropriate balance given the circumstance. Is there another place we can go? We've been through most of that already through the reports, and looking at the reports, I think one thing that was lost is there's a great opportunity for the clubs too in the longevity when you think that 70% of the first 3 phases have to have development plans in place. So again, that's not really a guarantee, but I think that with the leases is, I think, a good middle ground. We hear, I think we understand. I'm thankful, and I'm going to support this motion.
Councillor Dumanowski?
Just to follow up, your worship, I appreciate the comments Councillor Sharps brings to the table, and I guess where I'm in disagreement, or I wish I were in alignment, let me use affirmative language, is that it's an all or none, and I think Councillor McGrogan, you said it well. If we want to be the best for both ends, both economic development and the prosperity or opportunities that the rec clubs have, we need to find a mutual agreement. Nothing short of that would essentially mean you're done today, handing your keys, and there's nothing there. Or we give you a false pretense for the future, and we say, well, we're going to give you 5-year increments, but it's not likely to be 20 years, or I heard maybe up to 40 years. So the fact of the matter is we have to find a mutual agreement that satisfies both ends. I appreciate the different rec opportunities that come with these different groups. A long-term lease doesn't give you permanency, but it certainly gives you longevity. I will liken it to an agreement that council made with the Stampede Board and has done in succession for many years. So, but no one's going to pull the keys from the Stampede Board tomorrow, nor would we expect them to stop investing or moving forward with their plans and their vision. So I think this really does achieve both ends, and I think it is the best plan going forward. And one step better, it gives direction to staff to start working, dialoguing, and maybe negotiating with each group for a longer term solution. And so maybe you don't want 20 years, maybe you only need 5 years, but in the end, there's a solution. There's an alternative space or place or plans that you have, and there's a mutual agreement that the city can find with you. So I think it goes one step further than what I heard the petitioners make at the last meeting, never mind the emails we heard, is that we want some longevity, we want to be able to enjoy some security, but at the same time, we have an opportunity to safeguard the development plans for this parcel of land. So I firmly believe in the plans going forward, and ultimately, I really do believe that this will achieve both ends quite satisfactory. And in the end, again, what I like actually, and I'm going to say it again, the takeaway for me is that there's an opportunity for the city staff to negotiate and work with you. There's no hidden fine line statement here that says we're going to challenge you to move, or we're going to challenge you to negotiate a shorter lease time. What it says is we're going to start that dialogue, because it could take months or years to do that. And it might even be that there's an agreement found, but it will take you years as a group to find a new place or space, or to work with this community and other surrounding communities. So I really like this, and I'm very, very pleased with the security that it presents for both the city and for the rec groups.
Councillor Hirsch?
Your Worship, appreciate the comments to date, and I know there'll be more to follow. I actually appreciate the fact that, we did have the table event, because I think it did allow some perspective to be gained, certainly by City Council and perhaps the audience as well. But I honestly see two separate issues that I want to kind of strip from each other. One, what we're effectively doing with the area structure plan, if in fact it's voted on and approved, is adding some formality to an already designated land, which all parties concede and agree that it was all deemed industrial as it was. So that, having said, is the area structure plan is a planning document to which I support. So, full stop. But what I also support, however, is a frank and fulsome conversation with each club to determine a mutual course forward that makes sense for the club and the city. So, and I really believe that. We are charged with, as councillors, to look for a way forward for this city. And I believe that for all intents and purposes, this industrial plan makes sense, given the background and given the attributes that it does give. In some ways, I kind of wish it didn't, but it does. And I think with that, and we are all charged with the effective use of taxpayer funds, et cetera, et cetera. So, I certainly took the 2 weeks to certainly field a lot of emails, and also to think about it wholeheartedly with the balance and the decision making that makes sense for the city and the community. So with that, I will likely be supporting, and more than likely supporting, your resolution. Thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
Thank you. So I think it's important, and I just want to respond to Councillor Dumanowski. You're absolutely right. This is a win-win in terms of how the motion is presented. I think what I would make me really feel like it was a win-win if it wasn't on the table today, and we negotiated those leases and long-term agreements in good faith, and we're asking them to do it in good faith. And I guess my suggestion is that we step up first and we're the ones in good faith, and we say to the parties, we want to negotiate long-term leases, and we are wanting all parties to deal with this in the next 4 weeks. To me, that's us stepping up. Maybe we can then approve the ASP, they're happy, we're happy. So where I'm struggling with this is that particular, if this is doable and it's the best interest, can it wait 2 weeks?
Councillor Robbins?
Through the chair, I'm going to give you an example why you should never judge a book by its cover or title, I suppose. I have been to the drag strip more than one time, thank you very much. I have been to the Speedway as well. My mom has a a dear friend who likes to come to Medicine Hat specifically to be at the drag strip, and she's a good friend of my mom's, and cheering on women doing things in a male-dominated world is something I enjoy doing. And I had little nephews who love to go to the Speedway and watch the cars out there. So I have been out there many times, and I realize the great enjoyment that all of the crowd gets. People from in town, people from out of town, it's always a great night. So I'm going to encourage people to keep doing that. My concern after the last hearing was the description given by one of the gentlemen from Stantec that the leases were 5 years at a time. And I didn't think that that was a long enough time to really make plans. And there's just a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of fundraising that needs to be done and all of the commitment. And so I'm happy with this motion because it extends that time out to 20 years. And that 20-year time is a time that I hope that I'll take my children out to the various clubs. I see my invitation to the RC Air Show. I think they get a lot of enjoyment from attending that. I would be very concerned if we didn't have some direction to city administration to say this is the length of time we need to secure, because we heard a lot of, at our last council session, it may be 20 years, it may be 40 years, and those maybes are not helping people plan. And I think if you know it's going to be 20 years, that's what you can negotiate with the city, that's what council wants to see. If you want less, fair enough, it may not suit you to be in that long of a lease, you may want something lesser, but that is certainly what council is prepared to look at, and asking city management to engage in those discussions. So I look forward to 20 years of participating in these clubs, and for the rest of the citizens to be able to do that. I do also take into the fact that I do sit on the Public Services Committee, where we have a lot of conversation about recreation, what makes Medicine Hat special, and certainly all of these clubs do that, and I don't want to lose sight of that, and I want to give them some guarantees. I am concerned that if industry does pick up and grows, that you're going to find it on your doorstep of your club in a way that's affecting the enjoyment of the club. And so as industry grows out, if we're all hopeful that Medicine Hat's going to grow, because if it doesn't, we all have a big problem, tax-wise in years to come. But as industry grows out, I am worried about the impacts on the clubs that are in an area that's not really designed except for heavy industrial. That's like the long-term purpose as we heard from Director Sissons, from when it was annexed to now. So I am concerned about that, but the idea of having a long lease where plans can be made, we can see the impact of heavy industrial next door to recreational areas, I think is really valuable to have. So for that reason, I would be supporting, and I thank Councillor Knodel for making the motion.
Councillor Van Dyke?
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to say that a big part of the reason that I ran for city council was to protect the social prosperity of Medicine Hat, and that was recreational opportunities are a big part of that. And I recognize that the clubs out in this location contribute significantly to the community, both economically and by creating opportunity for people in the community to get together, to build social networks, and to participate in enjoyable activities. And I really value all of those things. Like Councillor Robbins, I have been out to the drag strip. I have ridden in a car on the Speedway and was terrified the entire time. But it was, I guess, kind of a bucket list opportunity for me. And I recognize the emotional attachment that many of the people in the room have to those clubs and those facilities. And but I do also want to recognize that we need to have economic growth within our community to support the community in the long term. And I think that this motion provides the balance needed. So it protects the best interests of the clubs, gives you time to plan for the future, while still offering surety to development in the community as well. So I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Hyder?
Through the chair, I was going to say this last week, and you know when you're leaving a place and saying, I should have said that. As I look around the gallery, this is the reason I wanted to be part of this council. This community comes together like no other I've ever seen. Whether we agree or disagree, we all have a passion for part of this city, and that's why I love being here. It was a tough thing for us the last couple of weeks, I would say. I'll speak for myself. To read emails and to receive phone calls of people who have passion about what they do. And we all have passions and loves for things. And it's hard to have the perfect answer because you don't ever have that. But the motion presented to us this evening, in our hope, gives us that balance, like Councillor Van Dyke has said. And I just want to applaud all of you for your efforts and expressing your love and passion for your hobbies and what you do. So thank you.
All right. I echo a number of the comments. I think in order to have a thriving community, we need each person here to have a good quality of life. And that does include good jobs and a thriving economy. But it also means recreation facilities and a place to go and hang out with like-minded people, to socialize and create memories, and to have something to be proud of and have a sense of belonging. That's critical. And so I feel that this motion does provide that balance, but I take into account Councillor Sharps's comments as well, that we have some trust to build, and I hope that this is the start of that as well. So seeing no more questions or comments, we will vote on the motion. That is passed.
Next, we have Bylaw 4692, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to adopt the Northwest Industrial Area Structure Plan for second and third reading.
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any debate, questions, comments? Councillor Robbins?
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to acknowledge that at the last meeting we had some questions about the economic impact, and we had received, all of us, I noted via email from Ms. Krizan, some two-page information about economic impact. So I just wanted to acknowledge and see if that could form part of the public record, since it was a question that was asked by council that was left unanswered at the time, but we received the answer collectively via email later.
I'm going to have to ask that interim city manager respond or defer.
Madam Chair, I'm going to have to take that under advisement. I believe perhaps our city solicitor should be consulted.
Okay. Does that?
Yeah, it was because it was an open question that was asked and answered, and council had indicated we were willing to listen to that answer. That's why I bring it to all of our attention that question was answered. It doesn't have to form part of the public record, but just acknowledge that it was answered would be helpful.
Okay. I don't have a procedural response for you right now. I'm assuming that you know the answer, or you wouldn't be asking the question, but I'm still going to just defer to the city solicitor. Councillor Sharps?
Sorry, yeah, I think I need some clarification if we had a procedural issue. do we continue with the motion on the table?
Well, I don't think that it will either just inform the public record or it won't. So I would suggest, although I'm once again looking at our interim city manager, I don't see why it would prevent the motion on the bylaw. It could be added to the public record after.
Through the chair, are you asking me?
I am.
I believe that you're okay to proceed with this. If city solicitor thinks otherwise, then I'll stand corrected.
I would also add that after the motion, once the bylaw gets second and third reading, or just second reading, once this matter has been dealt with, then council is at liberty to read and consider any of the information that has been presented. Councillor Knodel?
Through the chair. I'm just wanting to ask a clarifying question. So Councillor Robbins was asking about, we had asked Ms. Krizan, thank you, about the financials of their club and how that affected the community. Is that what this question was about? And my question is this concept of if it affects the procedural question has to do with us taking information in after the public hearing. Is that also correct? Am I hearing that right? Okay, so in regards to whether that becomes the public record or not, basically whether that's formally documented, should not, I mean, I suppose it could dictate, but I don't know if that, I guess my question is, how would this information affect our decision-making? Because that's at the core of this. Does that document of their financial records dictate our decision-making or not? And that's what we're waiting on the city solicitor to define for us, correct?
Interim city manager?
Through the chair, I believe that since you have already voted on a motion to provide direction to staff on how to move forward with the club's issue, that has been dealt with. You are now dealing with an ASP decision that was tabled, and you're okay to move forward with that regardless. There will be a lot of additional information coming from the clubs as we sit down and talk about how we can best facilitate their future. So I'm not clear on what goes on public record and what doesn't and how that's facilitated, but I do believe you're okay to move forward.
Councillor Robbins?
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that we had a process by which future generations looking at the decisions of this council knew what we considered. So if there's a process in terms of, further lease discussions, if that comes back before us, that information will be there. I'm confident it doesn't affect decision-making. It was just a matter of future generations of hatters being able to look and see what we did and know what we knew so they could understand the decision or disagree with it if they wanted. So I don't see why we couldn't proceed as is. I just wanted to make sure that we had acknowledged publicly that we'd received an answer to a question.
All right, seeing. Oh, my apologies. City Solicitor Bullock has his hand raised on Teams.
Oh, thank you. Just through the chair, I think since the public hearing is closed, it would not be appropriate for new information to be accepted as part of the record. But as the city manager has pointed out, this information could come to the attention of staff through the negotiation process on the new lease agreement. So those are my thoughts on the matter.
Thank you, City Manager, and I apologize for putting you on the spot. Seeing no further questions or comments, we will vote on the motion. The motion is passed.
Your worship, I move third reading of bylaw 4692 and wish it, and for to be passed, sorry, apologies.
Second.
Thank you. The motion is on the table, or is on the table. Can we, do we have, oh, Counselor Dumanowski?
Well, your worship, we're moving ahead, and certainly there's no desire to not be very transparent with the public, but just to make it very clear, what we have before council, and second reading has occurred, and third reading shortly, is the original ASP that was presented that you came and petitioned against. However, as you heard, the fundamental difference between the last date and today is that motion that Councillor Conodle put forward and was supported by council is to hold true to the ASP. However, give you the certainty of 20 years and a seat at the table with senior staff to negotiate if you want less time, or this becomes a launch point for meaningful discussions with the city and your groups to say, hey, you know what? We kind of bundled ourselves, but really we see ourselves as being different or doing something different or going elsewhere. How can we do this? And so that safeguard will be there because of the motion that preceded this. I want to make it very clear because I don't want you to leave here and feel like we pulled wool over your eyes. The phase 4, that overlay is held true. So actually, you have a double insurance in many ways because it did indicate that we would not be able to proceed with phase 4 before 70% or thereabouts of the other phases had been proposed or developed. Again, at that time, we were told 20 years, maybe to 40 years. I don't want to be crystal balling what the future is going to look like. Certainly, I don't know. You don't know, but the one kind of factor that really stood in the way of us moving forward was your longevity plans and that security. So I just want to say we've satisfied that, and I'll say it one more time. You now have a front row seat to negotiate, to create a strategy moving forward. So your comments, your petitions, your thoughts were not lost, certainly to this council. Thank you.
Counselor Sharps?
I won't beat a dead horse, and I'll make this quick. So when I look at the ASP, and I'm looking at the new verbiage that we just passed on the bylaw, and I think, again, for complete transparency, it's going to say up to 20 years, and that up to 20 years is what makes me still go, it's sitting right here. So if I was a lease holder out there, I'd be like, 20 years? Minimum or up to? So up to as a leaseholder, it's like me signing my Airbnb and saying, you have up to 7 days. I'm like, would you really pay 7 days? You probably wouldn't. So when I hear that kind of language, I just go, we're still, to me, they're no different than the position they're in. The position they're in currently with this new motion is no different than they were in 2 weeks ago, other than the city manager is going to work with them. And I think we all know the city admin was going to work with them anyways. They're always going to work with our citizens. So I never saw that as an issue. So that's where my concern still is. I don't see this any different than the PRO. We still have the right to come in as the leaseholder and say, Amazon's coming to town. You know, do I think Amazon's coming? No, I don't. But I get what they're saying. So I think this is still so fixable, but a totally different route where it's just held off a little bit longer. And yes, I know I'm suggesting maybe potentially redoing the ASP at a cost, but I guess when I look at what we spend on development permits for downtown, I think in my time being a downtown business owner, I think this is our third development plan. So I look at what we do with things like that and I think, And that drives me crazy because we haven't changed downtown. My building's still there. So, other than new pipes, thank you. So I was very grateful for that, but my point is, so we do spend the money, so why not do it here where there's so many more people engaged? It protects them, it protects us. In my mind, we're acting like a partner to the community. I'm not saying that the bylaw doesn't, it just makes me feel like we're a better partner to the community. So I guess I'm just not feeling they're still protected, and I would just really like to feel that they were a little bit more protected.
Counselor Knodel?
Thank you, Mayor Clark, through the chair. So one thing that I thought was important to share is that by having both the PRO from the area structure plan and this motion on the table, now we've approved both. You have more information than if we just nixed everything and kind of went back in time. So I hope that is at least a little bit helpful. I understand there's many of you that are passionate about this and want to see the future of your club prioritized. Totally warranted. The second thing is that the passion and the energy that you've brought to the table today, please bring that same energy to planning. And as soon as you hear something that affects you, like keep an eye on the website when it comes to shape your city, because the problem that we're seeing in regards to future planning is that people only show up when there's a problem, rather than being part of creating the city vision. So show up for any opportunity you have to create the vision for the city so that we can be a partner in the future of the community rather than just trying to negotiate at the time when we're at a bit of a, whatever the word for this would be. So thanks for showing up tonight and for sharing your thoughts with us.
Counselor Dumanowski?
Well, Your Worship, I just want to clarify, when I see the words, and certainly as I interpret them, the clubs may involve a defined lease extension up to 20 years. This is not, that up to 20 years means they're in the driver's seat, pun intended or not intended, whichever group you're with. You're in the driver's seat. You don't want a 20-year lease agreement because you're not comfortable with that, or you're comfortable, and you might say, why would we ask for a shorter lease arrangement? There are some groups that may be looking, and again, this may have given impetus for them to say, you know what, we need a longer-term strategy. And so we're gonna work with the staff, working with the city and the neighboring municipalities and find a long, permanent term approach outside of the PRO, the assurances that come from this. So I'm saying this on record because it becomes on a record that it is them, it is they that are in the driver's seat. And so they want 20 years, they get 20 years. But they may not want that. And they may be more comfortable with a shorter term extension and the flexibility that goes with that. So you want 20 years, you got it.
Counselor Sharps?
Well, through the chair, I'm so very happy to be wrong on this issue, but if I could just get clarification. When we're saying up to 20 years, at no time, if I understand you correctly, Councillor Dumanowski, the city will ask for that lease to be done earlier, and I am sure that is not correct. There is an opportunity, just if you wouldn't mind, City Manager Haglund, if I understand this, and if I'm wrong, happy to be corrected. Up to 20 years, there is still language around that lease agreement that if we need to, we can renegotiate that lease immediately.
I can field that one. So I think the key language is that it's mutually agreeable solutions. Wait, mutually agreeable path forward. So it would have to, whatever the terms and conditions of the lease are, would have to be mutually agreeable to both parties.
Understood. So that is my concern right there. So if they, to Councillor Dumanowski's point, if it's a guarantee of 20 years, I think everybody's happy, but I'm not reading that language in there. My understanding is that the lease must be mutually agreeable, but that just tells me that they don't get a lease until they agree. Am I getting that wrong? Or are they walking out of here with a 20-year lease?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, the duration of the lease Sorry, let me do that again. I believe what council has provided tonight is clear direction and a negotiating mandate to staff. And we will take that away and make our very best endeavors to enter into those negotiations in a transparent way. Everyone has heard the mandate, so there's no secret about what that mandate is that we're bringing to the table. I think there's ample clarity on both sides.
All right. We will get to the vote. I want to recognize that I think what Councillor Sharps is driving at is that relationship of trust that we need to build within not just this group, but all of the city. There's an important job that we have ahead of us, and I think many of us spoke to that during the election, that we have to build trust with members of our community, and I think that's where the trepidation may be, and I want to really communicate that also to the administration and how important it is to this council that people feel comfortable doing business with us and they trust us, and I know that you hear that, interim city manager. So, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just want to confirm that we certainly hear the message.
All right, seeing no further questions or comments, we will vote. The bylaw is passed.
Next up, we have presentations. 6.2, Parks and Recreation Master Plan. James Will, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Your worship, point of procedure, I'm wondering if we can give the crowd at one moment to vacate if they're not interested in staying for the remainder of the council.
You bet.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
All right, we're going to get started. Director Wills, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I am excited to be here to talk about our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and I think that our last topic certainly surrounded recreation, and it's a good lead into this. Sorry.
If you wouldn't mind clearing out before you talk, thank you. Thank you.
So this topic is one that we've talked about for quite some time. I know last year I was speaking to council about this topic, providing updates throughout to the previous council. We've worked through a number of items included in the master plan with the previous Public Services Committee and given some updates and a walk through the plan with the current Public Services Committee. So very excited to be here to talk about this. And who doesn't want to talk about a 165-page document in front of an audience? So I do just want to recognize Scott Richter. Scott is the Manager of Business and Innovation and the current interim Recreation Manager, and certainly a powerhouse behind the development of this plan. We also utilize a consultant for gathering external information, but really Scott and the Parks and Recreation team drove the bus on this. And so we're very excited to be here to present the updated master plan. It's a consolidation of two documents, so I'll just go through a quick overview. I know committee has seen this, but I will go through this quickly and certainly take time for questions. I'm not sure where I point this. I can't seem to advance. Here?
Is it on?
It's on. Oh. Okay, thank you. So I'll go through quickly some highlights of the plan, the engagement program summary, and just a little explanation of the difference between our facilities for the future engagement and the master plan engagement. The document structure, so if you've had an opportunity to go through the document and to understand the different parts of the document, and then where we're at with the next steps for implementing the plan. So just some key highlights as an overview. The consolidation, this document represents a consolidation of two 10-year-old plans. It's the Park System Management Plan and the Recreation Master Plan. We've updated various pieces or various components of those previous documents. Some of them were certainly still relevant, and we're able to use that information and update it and see if it still was in line with trends in recreation and in park spaces and parks management. It was brought forward. The substantial engagement program that we used for the master plan update was online surveys, the pop-up tents. We had them in park spaces, had them indoors, outdoors, stakeholder sessions, workshops, internal staff workshops, and then engagement. We even utilized student engagement with students at a school. So tried to utilize various forms of engagement. We had about 400 responses, over 400 responses on Shape Your City, which was the city's engagement tool that we use for surveying. The plan addresses numerous aspects of community parks and recreation. So the strong engagement with stakeholders, we use that to inform how we plan, build, and operate our amenities and our facilities. We really focused on values, and this, in addition to the facilities for the future plan, really wanted to focus on what is it that our community values. Because if you move forward with an eventual decision around a facilities or a bricks and mortar type question, and the community says yes or no to that, if the answer is no, then what does that mean? And without knowing what the values are for the community, that's difficult to make a decision. So we certainly wanted to be able to highlight what the values are, what residents view as the important aspects of parks and recreation, amenities and facilities and services for council to be able to make decisions. Aligning current and future needs with the available amenities while keeping in mind that we have some facility decisions ahead of us in the next several months, but also looking at a balance between social, economic, environmental values. And we know that the environment came forward as a very strong theme in the master plan. We saw this as the community said, we don't want to just see a regulatory compliance. We don't want to just look at what is it that we need to do to make sure that we're meeting legislative requirements, that we need to make sure that we're taking care of the environment as good stewards. Okay, here we go. So what are some of the main items updated? You can see on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a summary of the plan's contents, of what has stayed the same, what's been updated, and some of the new elements to the plan. Really, a focus of this was aligning with the MDP. So we know the MDP, the Municipal Development Plan, was our guiding document. So it's really our strategic, our top-level document, and then our master plan for Parks and Recreation. While we consolidated two separate plans, it then takes direction from the MDP. And so there needs to be alignment with the MDP for us to make decisions around recreation. Also wanted to make sure that we looked at trends, leading practices in updating the plan, which included local, provincial, regional, and national trends in recreation. And they are changing. We see not only from sports that are changing, we know that over time we see sports that gain memberships and we see sports that lose members, but we also see that people's interest and their available time, and that really came out as an outcome of the plan, that we heard from the community that people have less time available. They have less time for volunteer opportunities, but also less time for recreation in formalized recreation sports and activities. So we certainly see spontaneous use as a greater focus for us in the future. Assessment of existing indoor and outdoor facilities, and we know that led into our facilities for the future plan that we're currently working on. Benchmarking Medicine Hat against other comparable cities. We saw lots of good things for Medicine Hat, some things that set us apart, that really made Medicine Hat a place that you want to come and live, work, and play. Facility, amenity, and program priorities. Some of the aspects of the plan that are new. So we know that the priority for pools. So we saw aquatics as a number one issue for indoor aquatics, outdoor aquatics, as well as trail systems. Classification of our outdoor amenities. So we included this in the plan. And then really the outcome of the plan. So we have this strategic document, but where do we go from here? Is this a plan that sits on the shelf, or is this something that we refer to once in a while? The outcome of the plan, there are 50 action items, and the immediate, the near term, and the action items that we're looking at in the next 5 years, those are in front of us at the end of the plan and also scattered throughout the plan. So what does the new plan offer? As I'd mentioned, there's strong alignment with the MDP. It's a real focus on how we grow as a community. And we talk about this, I know committee has seen my presentation a couple times on how our community grows between now and 2050. And that's important. We have an aging community, but we have a community that we need to consider attracting residents to Medicine Hat and offering amenities that are going to do that. It also focuses on how we grow as a community, but how we engage with groups. And I think tonight Council heard that there are groups that we aren't actively involved with managing their clubs. And so how do we engage with those groups? And just, I've used the analogy of restaurants before. So we're not in the business of restaurants as a organization, but we want to set an environment that restaurants exist because it's a service that our residents value. And so when we historically have looked at recreation plans, we've looked at what is it that the city offers. So what can we do to change our programs? What do we do to change our facilities? But it's more than just that. It's what exists in the community, what the community values as far as amenities and recreation offerings. And then that's important for us to be able to engage with those groups. And so the plan outlines that it's necessary for us to engage with those groups in a stronger fashion, a stronger way, but also to develop ways that those groups know how they can approach the city and how the city can work with them as a partner. Offers strategic direction for the future growth of parks and recreation, and as I mentioned, there's 50 action items that are classified as immediate, near, and medium term with a review in 5 years just to recalibrate and reprioritize. We know that we've seen priorities change in the last 10 years, and so 5 years we want to make sure we go back and make sure we're still on the right path. So the engagement process, I've mentioned at a high level what we did for engagement. We've done a review of past engagement program results. So the City of Medicine Hat and also the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association, there's a survey that was sent out. Medicine Hat had a high number of responses. I know it was promoted here in Medicine Hat. So we had good representation in our community. Also leverage and alignment on the findings of the MDP engagement program. So we saw the engagement that was done around the MDP and seeing how the community valued walkable communities, what's needed to be within a walking distance of your home. Is it rec centers? Is it malls? Is it access to amenities or food sources? And so those are all things that we reviewed in development of the plan. Internal staff engagement at the onset of the project, really to kick it off as far as where does staff see the pinch points and the priorities from a staff perspective. Stakeholder sessions with various local groups, including workshops, calls, face-to-face interactions. We used as many different forms of communication as we could because not everybody could attend, whether it's virtual or in-person stakeholder engagement sessions. The pop-up tent sessions on sites, we had 7 of them as the plan evolved. The online presence, as I mentioned, we had 400 plus responses to this. We had over 800 responses to our facilities for the future engagement, which I know we've provided an update through a briefing note to council. Not surprising that people are interested in the bricks and mortar, and so that was a bit expected, but we certainly had a good response from the community around the master plan. Presentations to Public Services Committee, and then certainly a summary of the engagement activities are included in the final report. On the right-hand side, you'll see the IAP2 spectrum. So we use this model for engaging. It's actually the same model that I understand Corporate Communications is looking at for their community engagement strategy and framework. So we're certainly in line with that. And what we heard from the community was a resounding response that said, we want to be heard from. We want to talk with you. We want to hear, how do you make decisions, and where the priorities developed, and how do you come to that? So we used really all the spectrums of the IAP2 model, really from informing the community, where we said, here's some certain elements of the plan that are going to stay in the plan, but also consulting, involving, collaborating, and empowering. And so we tried to use the full spectrum of the IAP2 model for engagement. So some of the key findings I've mentioned previously in the last slide. So the community really has a strong desire to be involved, and that really does partner very well with our corporate communications initiative around stakeholder engagement. The community wants to hear from us and wants us to hear from the community. Natural environment, as I mentioned, is a really key defining feature of Medicine Hat. So really the geography here is unique, and our residents said that's a value for us. We see it in how we plan recreation amenities. So we have a high number of kilometers of trails per resident, and we know that we have some of the highest in Alberta. We know that because it is also a strong point for us. So we know outdoor aquatics, that fits well with our climate. We know that trail systems. We have individuals that come down from Calgary, utilize our trail system because it's a longer riding season here. So you can come here, you can get an extra month in the year. You can get in here 2-3 weeks ahead of time and another couple of weeks on the end of the season. So we know we're attracting people to Medicine Hat, and that's an area where we want to build on our strength. But the natural environment, it's important to protect the natural ecosystems. So stronger policy, and not just around legislative compliance. Keep on keeping on. Our consultant would say that to us when he said, I would hear this from people time and time again, that there was a high level of satisfaction with indoor and outdoor recreation amenities and the way that the city delivers programs. So people certainly value having the opportunities, value having the services available in the community. Some adjustments to indoor and outdoor priorities, as I mentioned, the available time that people have to put to formalized commitments for recreation. And then also aquatics and trails. We certainly saw that as a very high, resounding #1 priority from the community. So how do we come up with what the priorities are in the plan? Well, priorities, they were not just based on the current engagement, but there was factors that we looked at for weighting them. So when you look at the priorities of the 2011 plan, we looked at 10% of that weighting for it. Trends and leading practices was 20%. The stakeholder engagement and public engagement program was 50%. I'll come back to that in a second. Current plans, so other current initiatives, documents, things that we have underway, other studies, was another 20% of the plan. And when you look at saying, well, how much weight do we put on the engagement with the community in this current engagement process? 50%. So is that right number? Should it be 50%, 60, 40%? We got to a point when you hit a critical mass of responses where you either know you're hitting the right thing, when you start to hear repetitive answers. You start to hear from the community, they're saying, okay, I think we're on the right path because we're hearing the same answer again and again from the community. So we do believe that we've captured accurately what the general themes from the community are for priorities. You can see on the right-hand side the amenities, what the priorities are. So the master plan recommendations. So the action items, you'll see these throughout the document. The immediate term, you can see it's really hot off the heels of the plan endorsement. So really within a year, we're seeing as working on those in 2022. The near term, 1 to 3 years. So we want to embed those in our next business plan. So we want to make sure that those are elements that are aligned with council strategic priorities, but also embedded in the department's business plan. The medium term, 3 to 5 years, and continued was really recognizing the importance of supporting existing initiatives. So the things that the community said, you're doing well, keep doing that. It may not be an action item that you need to go out and change something drastically, but keep doing this. So why no long term? Even though we keep talking about 2050, we keep talking about alignment with the MDP and how the community grows to 2050, because we need to revisit the plan in 5 years. I've mentioned again before that the community said our priorities have changed in the last 10 years. So do we go 10, 20 years before we come back and revisit it? We know sports change. We know sports that were big in the past are no longer sports that people are playing. So it's important to stay on having really those near-term, medium-term action items always in front of you. Very quickly, document structure. So there are recommendations throughout the document, not just in one section. The placement, where the action items, the recommendations come up, it really just informs us what inspired it. So what part of the plan, how do we come up with the action items? So you'll see a consolidated list at the end. of the report, but they are certainly noted throughout the document, so you can compare, like, where did this come from? And you go back to the sections to find them. So next steps for the plan. This started with a workshop that we gave at the end of January to Public Services Committee. So we went through the workshop here in number 1 on the screen. Council adoption of the new Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This is the stage where we're at, is presenting really a final document that we've had our feedback, we've put the draft document out, worked through it with the workshop with council, and certainly here for presentation for adoption. Initiate immediate term and near-term action items. Establishing a stronger environmental ethic and the robust public and stakeholder engagement. We put this on here because we heard so strongly from the community that those were items that they wanted to see come forward. Modernizing existing policies, develop our new policies. We know that the outcome of this is looking at off-leash areas. Our parks bylaw is outdated. We know it has to be updated. So those are items that we see as right away. We need to start focusing on that. Bring forward the facilities plan for direction to commence the next level of planning and project initiation. So there are a number of options. It's difficult to talk about the Recreation Master Plan without talking about facilities. I know that's a separate study that we did, but that is where we're at as far as what are the options in front of us, because there's a whole bunch of options when it comes to ice surfaces, indoor, outdoor aquatics, what that means for how our city grows, how that impacts our neighborhoods and walkability. And those are the options that we're analyzing right now and looking to bring those forward. So next steps, as I mentioned, looking to have the plan adopted and would replace the 2010 Park System Management Plan and the 2011 Recreation Master Plan. And as I mentioned previously, incorporate immediate and near-term action items as outlined in the plan into our next business plan cycle. And I think that concludes my summary overview, so I'm certainly willing to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Councillor Hirsch.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair, so I'll take the blame on why this document is actually in front of us. I was the one that petitioned and got support for this review. And it's more of a commentary. I appreciate the fact that this is now, and before I get into it, just want to sincerely thank James, Scott, you guys and your teams. Well done, 165 pages of lots of information packed in there, so, you know, tip my cap. And for me, I really appreciate the effort on this, because now that it's a new document and a living document, I actually like the fact that you indicated that we're gonna look at this every 5 years. Because I guess the mantra for me is, who thought the pickleball was gonna rise like it did? And I mean, realistically, that's how our environment is now changing so fast, and we just have to stay up, or we're gonna really be in the same situation that we're finding ourselves in. And I know we can't relate this to facilities, but I kind of wish we would have had this 5 years ago as well, because we're looking at, you know, aging facilities, and I know that's coming, but we can certainly be proactive with us having this top of mind every 5 years. You know, I know it wasn't planned, but it's coincidental, the fact that we've had the Northwest user groups come tonight, in the fact that we had a handshake agreement that was over 40 years ago. And that's, in and of itself, problematic, because we never revisited, as councils of the day, never revisited, and we need to be having that dialogue. And I guess this is an exact replica as we should be reacting and acting by looking at it in very timely fashions. And that way, the messaging is very clear and concise, and we can stand on that document, just like we will stand on this document, again, as a living document, and be reviewed every 5 years, because I think that's the important thing for me. Lots of information, lots of direction in here, lots of feel-good attention to detail in regards to where we're headed, but certainly with the commitment that we're going to be looking at this on a regular basis makes me very, very happy. So on behalf of myself, thank you very much for the effort.
Councillor Knodel.
Thank you, Mayor Clark, through the chair. Hello, Managing Director Will. I really appreciate all the time and effort that goes into a document of this magnitude, as was stated by Councillor Dumanowski. I think I sit on public services, and in navigating a document like this and being a newer face to a chair like this. I look at a document like this, and I'm going to ask you a question that I know the answer to, but more for the general understanding of the humans in the city. For who is this written for, and how does the average reader of that document navigate it for the purpose of moving forward?
Thank you, through the chair. So the document, there are really several audiences. It's a roadmap for our department to know where we put our action items, where we put our effort. It's where our community collectively said, this is what we value for recreation. So it really is a community plan. And how we navigate through the document, I mean, we recognize that these aren't always fun to read. As much as we work in this field, they're not always the most enjoyable to read. And so we tried to make it where the document is user-friendly, and you can find action items both throughout the plan at the end, but sections that are identified where we heard from the community, here's what our priorities are, in a manner that is easy to read. And so I think we really feel that the audience, what we heard back, we heard from reps from ARPA, we heard throughout the province, where they said, we think you got it from our perspective, as far as you capture this. Recognizing that this document doesn't answer the questions. It doesn't answer everything. So it's really a starting point for us. So where do we go next? We look at what our action items are. We look at what the priorities that the plan identifies, and then we get to work on it. And so that's exciting for us to be able to dive into it, but this doesn't solve our issues. It really just, it's our playbook. And so that's what we're excited about, is that it's a user-friendly playbook that we can go back to, we can reference easily, and the community knows what we're working from.
Councillor Dumanowski?
Your Worship, Managing Director, well, thank you for the presentation. I'm interested, and I'm sure the community will equally find it interesting. Believe it or not, those who take interest in things look at these things and they start to peel the layers back and make sense of it. So I will just add to Councillor Hirsch's comments around the need to do this review, and obviously there was impetus by last council to do that at Councillor Hirsch's motion. I'm glad we're at this juncture. What I'm curious about is, it's page 35 for us, is the master plan update and the contributing factors, the percentage of weighting. I'll come back to the priorities of the 2011 plan, weighting at 10%. I'm not critical of it, I'm just curious about it, because like some of the comments that have been made, I look at, in the last number of years, 10 years if we want to say that, I guess that would be about right. I wonder how many of these priorities are new or different entirely, or have just gathered or gained more weighting in the form of a priority for the community, and certainly on the indoor side, I can speak to indoor child play. I don't recall that being kind of noted in the same way that it is here. It's well up there. The climbing walls, they've been around, but there's more of a desire for that kind of recreation, and roller derby. On the outdoor side, we have off-leash dog areas. I mean, that's quite remarkable. I'm a dog owner myself, but I can appreciate that people see that as a outdoor form of programming and recreation. So it's on the list. I don't recall that being given a lot of attention in the past. Playgrounds was there, but believe it or not, that is one that many years ago I pushed really hard for. We had a city that had dilapidated, outdated, beyond code playgrounds. That's just the truth of the matter. And we made a lot of gains there, and we have playgrounds that are the envy of any other municipality for sure. And then again, outdoor roller derby, I noticed on the outdoor side. My point in bringing those up is to elevate some of the ones that stand out for me. And yet, and not to be critical, but I'm curious around the weighting of a 10-year plan, I'm going to say, 11 years, 12 years, at 10%, because a lot of these swimming pools, ice facilities, et cetera, obviously are not a 10-year or a 5-year window item. And not to suggest that the plan says they are, because we're going to review it every 5 years. But I'm curious why the 10% weighting when we know there are going to be new things, like pickleball was a good example that came up and exploded, absolutely exploded. Where some of these came in as far as priorities or benchmarks. It certainly has changed, but my worry would be then, if I can reflect that, would be that, and you can challenge my belief, is that we're only gonna put 10% of weighting to historical data, and yet, by the time we get some of these things off the ground, never mind do a study, but get them off the ground and find capital plans that support the development of them or redevelopment, we're well into that timeline. And so it's not to suggest you're saying every 5 years or 10 years we're throwing it away, but help me reconcile the 10% weighting against higher weighting for something that seems to me is likely to stay fairly whole, but just where the priorities land might be a little different.
So through the chair, so the weighting was really where we saw the priority ranking. It didn't make the list if it didn't hit a current trend, or if it, so there's still the 20% that we're compared to. Is this still an upward trend? Are we seeing this as a growing trend, or is it relatively stable? We didn't go into individual sports. We didn't go into that as far as a strategic document. So there's really two elements. We looked at, is the current plans that we have in place up until hopefully today, but the 2010, 2011 plans, are those still in line with what we're seeing in national, provincial, regional trends? And so those were not just what we heard from the community, but also the 20% of the weighting was, are those in line with the trends that we see? The elements of the 2010, 2011 plan, yeah, you can see a lot change in the 10-year period. So we can see, we've used pickleball as an example, but also racquetball in the other way. So we see racquetball was the sport that everybody played, and now we have one court in the city at Crestwood Rec Center. And so we certainly see that change over time. The ranking system, really, if it made the plan, it's a priority for us. We just saw the highest focus was around our aquatics, around our trail systems. Probably not surprising, though, coming through a pandemic where we saw trail utilization in some areas, saw 3 times the amount of people on trails. We saw more people using outdoor swim spaces, because for a while that's all you could swim is in an outdoor space or at a lake, or trying to get a way to get through summer without being able to go into a facility. So that's not surprising for us to see that, but we also know that also is combined with aging facilities. We know that there's some challenges there. So really the 2010, 2011, we're not throwing out those plans or saying those priorities, whether or not they were fully implemented, they're not as important. We really looked at the trend and then putting some weight to our historical plans. Because when we went through it, we said there's elements of those plans that are still very relevant today. Not sure if I've answered your question.
You did supplementary. No, you did. Thank you. So conversely, you mentioned that 50% was public engagement and stakeholder input. So, and I'm sure you have a great answer for this, but how did you ensure that you were hearing from the public, but you were, was there a fancy algorithm of some sort that ensured that you didn't have heavy lobbying by certain interest groups? Not to suggest they shouldn't do that, but because that arguably is a vote of confidence toward a particular sport. But how did you ensure that there was good, solid, balanced representation in such a way that allowed you to derive a good priorities list without it being kind of railroaded or taken over by a couple of strong groups that thought by virtue of getting a lot of people to put out their input or put in their input, which is what we wanted, but at the same time kind of skewed the results? How did you ensure that?
So through the chair, so it's a good question. I think first and foremost, I'll say it wasn't a scientific survey, so it wasn't within plus or minus percentage of error, margin of error. However, what we were looking for was trends from the community. So we're looking for values, looking for trends. We approached 170 different user groups where we didn't directly hear back from our major user groups. Our major user groups participated. Where we didn't hear back from some of our groups, we followed up with calls, emails. We did have some in-person conversations with them. Really where we said, when we had our stakeholder engagement sessions, so the 7 open houses, the public pop-up tents, when you start to hear the same thing over and over again, and we validated it by putting the information in front of them. So we would go and say, when you had 30 people that would show up, and we said, so this is what we've heard in the plan, this is what we've developed as our priorities, where are we missing the point, and continue to refine that through our engagement process. And we worked with Dr. John Butchko through EDS and certainly a gentleman who has put together a number of plans with other communities. And we asked the question, like, how do we validate? How do we know that we've got the right priorities? Because we aren't contacting X percentage of the population. We're saying this is an open survey. These are engagement sessions that you can show up to. And really what he reiterated was what I shared, was once you start to get to hear the same information coming back from the public, you've probably hit your point.
Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, and through the chair, Director Will, you'll be shocked to hear I don't actually have any questions for you. And the reason I always ask you lots of questions, but the reason I don't is we did spend a couple of hours where I think Councillor Van Dyke and I peppered you with 100 or so questions, and because we're like that. And so I appreciate your patience with us as you answered all of them. My thanks as well to Manager Richter, who was not only happy to answer the questions, but had the answers at his fingertips. And I appreciate the amount of work that went into this document and how it's been a project that I think you've loved to work on. It seems like you have anyway. That's the way it comes across to me when we talk about it. I'm very excited to be on public services, to be able to work on these immediate term items, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank our consultant. I've forgotten his name, but you just said it.
John.
John,
Butchko.
he was wonderful answering questions as well. His philosophy of Parks and Rec was really engaging when we got a chance to talk to him, so I really appreciate him as well. And I think I would be remiss completely if I didn't acknowledge the leadership of your managing director, Brian Mastel, who has obviously been dedicated good staff to work on this very important project. So I thank all of you so much, and I look forward to working with you on the immediate implementation of it, assuming that it passes.
Councillor Van Dyke.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm basically just echoing everything that Councillor Robbins said. I'm not sure how many times I've read through this now, at least probably 4, and I appreciate the Parks and Rec open meeting we had. I know I came with over 60 questions or comments that have been implemented into the master plan, so I appreciate that very much. Obviously, you know better than anyone that people are very passionate about this subject in the city. And for people that are interested in knowing this, that I think it was 27% of people that filled out the survey felt that additional tax dollars should go towards parks and recreation facilities and programming in the city. Is that not correct? I think so.
So through the chair, I think it was more respondents than not felt
Right,
that way.
yes.
So it was a majority of respondents. Yeah.
Anyways, so my thanks to both yourself and to Manager Richter for all of the work, and your team. I know there was quite a lot of people that put a lot of work into this, so thank you very much.
Councillor McGrogan.
Thank you. Managing Director Will, thanks, and to all your team for a great job on this. And again, I've had a pretty good chance to familiarize myself with this. Very thankful. I have a kind of a processed question, I guess, and it might be more directed at the interim city manager, Hagelin. But I was curious, as we march down this road, we have this plan in place. And as you know, we have a new council, and I'm sure staff keep hearing. When I was on the campaign trail, I heard, can hit your head on the table a few times, but we also did our surveys and you know, our reach outs and heard things from the community. So I guess where I'm getting to is, what if there's some, through strategic planning, I know we should be done that pretty soon, there's some priorities that don't align perfectly with this, that may be somewhat different. Maybe it's horseback archery or it's something. How do we adjust the plan, or do we, or is it, no, this is the plan and this is the road we're marching down? I'm just curious how that looks.
Through the chair to Councillor McGrogan, our department and divisional plans are always calibrated to and aligned with council's priorities, and as articulated in our budgets and business plans and so on, that will come back for your approval, obviously. So that's a constant back and forth, and each budget is set that provides the signal to exactly how much we can accomplish along the way of a plan, the speed and the magnitude of the implementation.
Thank you. And just, yeah, and on that, I completely understand, and I thank you for that. I've seen many times that those shifts sometimes it's, it's in this document and this is the way we're going. So I appreciate those comments and thank you.
All right, I have some questions. On page 83, it's also on page 131 of the plan, not of your presentation. It says, as a medium-term action, to consider an indoor ice facility with more than one, up to 4 sheets of ice in a single facility, ensuring spectator viewing areas are sufficient. And that's based on what we heard of the city has many fantastic facilities for large-scale tourism, but lacking in ice sport facilities with several sheets under one roof. And then on page 83, you talk about prioritizing the needs of local residents, and that one of the 3 most prominent concerns are the facilities that were closed at the time of the consultation. Can you explain to me how you arrived at this recommended action?
So, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just trying to locate the second part of the question, but I'll start with the ice facility. So we know that the major immediate concern was having Moose Rec Center closed. And so we heard from groups where they said, initial response was open Moose Rec Center. And we said, so is that because that works better to have that set up in the community? We know that it costs us more. We know that there are savings by putting facilities together. From an ice surface standpoint. So we have an example of that in the community with Kinplex, and we know that it costs us less than having 2 standalone ice surfaces like Howlands and Moose. And so what we heard back from the group was, well, open Moose now, it is more efficient even from a tournament base to have the ice surfaces together, which is why most communities will put them together. They oftentimes locate them even in neighborhoods like an industrial park, or because they're ice surface is typically a destination facility. And they're better to be together. As many as you can put together is typically better for tournament use, because you don't have people driving around, and you can use less Zambonis to clear the ice, and so there's less operating costs for it. But the major issue was the groups that were saying, the ice user groups were saying, but my kids are getting older now, so you don't have a facility built now, so you have to open Moose. That's really why a recommendation came through about you need to start pursuing putting these facilities together. Our facilities they're not 30, 40 years old. They're built in the 1960s. The curling club was 1956 with the original ice slab. So that's really on the last few years that you'll get out of that facility without major work. As you get into the older facilities, when you start to have to do major work that are one or two codes, building codes behind, you start opening up those facilities and you have asbestos abatement and a whole bunch of other things to deal with. And so really from our perspective was you need to start moving towards modernizing, consolidating facilities, but you have an immediate problem in front of you. And that immediate problem is we don't have ice right now, and the kids are getting older. And so that's really why the 2 recommendations to open Moose, but also to start pursuing that next step.
Okay, but on page 88, you say that one of the recommendations, and it is a continued, is to conduct economic feasibility studies and business cases as part of determining the size, configuration, and location of new amenities. So are you saying that you've already done the economic analysis necessary to make this determination?
So, Your Worship, really what we've heard and what we know for our ice surfaces, we've worked it to a level that we have a reasonable comfort as far as knowing what our costs are. When you start to look at assessment, like redeveloping an area or brownfield, like remediation of a site, you can go and see assessment growth from that. We have a reasonable degree of certainty with that. When you start to look at the picture for this, I know I'm getting into my facilities kind of analysis, but really when you start to look at, we know the YMCA has an aging facility downtown, and it's an indoor pool. It's a lane pool or lap pool. which is not what's used for recreation swimming. So it's exercise pool. The Southridge YMCA had space for a 5-lane lap pool, which was again not a recreation facility. So Crestwood Rec Center, which is our facility, and the downtown YMCA, we know that those facilities typically do not see use from the public for recreation swimming, not very high utilization. They're for aquafit and they're for lane swimming. And so that's where we said, what happens when we eventually have to replace those? We know the YMCA has a $3 million campaign for the downtown facility, and whether it's the city's money or it's the community that has to support it. So there's an aging facility there. We know the curling club's aging with a potentially a $7.9 million problem like right now in front of them. And so we're at a point where all of these decisions, I used the chessboard analogy with the last council, and I said, you can't move one piece without talking about all of them. So if we start looking, we could say, what's the size of a replacement facility? We could build like for like. We could say we'll build a Crestwood Rec Center. We know we have to put close to $8 million into Crestwood Rec Center, and that doesn't get us any more amenities. It doesn't make it more user-friendly. It's a lot of it is structural. It's dealing with the tank issues. Like, it doesn't look drastically different. So essentially a coat of paint. And when you look at, do we put money that it costs us more to maintain a facility than the insured value of it? That's where we said we have to start asking these questions, because these facilities are not built in the 80s. We talk about a bunch of infrastructure money that came into the city in the 80s. That was Equidale. Equidale is also in need of reinvestment in Equidale. So we put the pieces on the chessboard and said we can't move one without impacting the others. And if we're looking at a potential replacement facility through our facilities plan as one of the options that we'll put in front of council, how do you determine the scope of that? We know Lethbridge has an ATB center that is larger than Big Marvel Go Center. We've got an option where we could say we could have put 5 lanes at the Southridge YMCA, but we know through our current utilization of our lap pools, that's not serving what the community wants for a recreation pool. So we said, let's not deal with these piecemeal. Let's start looking at what all these options are together. Our project initiation, we're really in project identification phase right now of our facilities plan. That's bringing all of these forward to council and saying, here's the pros and cons of each of these options, and here's what your economic impact can be from a reasonable degree of certainty. As you start to get into design, that's obviously where you get within X percentage of this is what our final cost is going to be. But we're at a point right now where we said everybody's working independently on their plans. We've got a curling club, we have the YMCA, we've got the city working on aging facilities, and we can't do this in isolation because there's one resident that's paying for this one way or another. So we have to start working together on it.
Yeah, I do understand all of that. It's more about the conducting the economic feasibility studies and business cases as part of determining the size, configuration, and location of new amenities. That's still work that's underway. So I think what I'm asking is, by agreeing to this, am I agreeing to a multiplex? And secondly, when we're talking about economic feasibility studies and business cases, how do you integrate or consider weight the social and built environment determinants of health? Because I think those often do not make it into economic analysis, but that's part of our role for sure.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this really is under a continued. So this is work that we were already doing, trying to figure out how do we address this problem. We have to address it one way or another. And we know that our current capital plans, so we're always looking at how do we optimize our current facilities. We know that means getting out in front of major problems before they become an issue through preventative maintenance. But that preventative maintenance is getting more costly as they get older. And so you start to replace a facility a piece at a time. So it's a slab, it's change rooms that are not up to our current building code and things like that you start to change over time. And as you cut into a building, it costs more and more to renovate. So this was continued work that we're saying we've heard from user groups. We know this is work that we had to do to say, does it make the most sense for us to invest money in a facility that is already 60 years old? Are we going to keep it to 2050? Because we keep looking for that 2050 mark. We said that aligns with the MDP, how our community grows. The very tough thing is if we look at it strictly from a financial, like, does this cost more or this cost more? There will be situations where it says it will cost us more to go and take this other path. But there are other elements that are not being addressed right now. We know that over 50% of our community lives in the south residential sector, and they don't have some of the amenities that we see elsewhere in the community. So we could address it from the same way that we're doing now. We could say, let's have walkable pools, but we probably need more of them. If we're going to look at, if you look at a radar and say, where's our coverage area? We don't have it right now across our community. And we can say we can't afford it, and that's not what we're gonna do. But that's a conscious decision to say, we're gonna stick with what we have, and we're gonna have aging facilities. And I think most members of council have seen the demographic change that I've presented through the facilities presentation around how our community grows. And our community does get older. We know what our where we're headed right now to 2050 if we don't have anything that changes that and changes what we're offering for people to move to Medicine Hat. So how do you value that? Well, we can model, what does that look like as far as how our community grows going forward? What if that changes? What if we change what our demographics are? We know that our community I'm stepping into assessment world here, but we know that we get assessment revenue from our business community, but you have to have the workforce for it. And that's why we included it so heavy in our facilities plan, because it is problematic as we see that demographic, as we start to reach that demographic in 2050. Those are harder for us to put numbers on. The real financial is, do we keep, we could put 7.9 million, $8 million into Crestwood, we could put $8 million into the curling club, or the curling club could put that into there, and we could keep those facilities going. But are they offering what the community is looking for? That's harder to put a dollar value on. So there'll be some values decisions, which is why we focused on values in the facilities plan and also in our master plan as well.
Okay,
To the chair, no, you are not approving a multiplex.
thank you. And again, the business case and the economic analysis, does that include a literature review around social and built environment determinants of health, and how will that be weighted?
So, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Retta, for answering that. I totally missed that part of the question, so thank you. Yeah, this isn't approving a build for anything. This is really continuing the work. So the analytical work that we're doing right now, certainly Parks and Rec, we're not the experts in that, but we know that there are experts both within our organization for the economic and the financial work. We also have external resources that we're looking at for how do we determine that? And that is a hard thing to put a dollar value on. What is the value of health of a walkable community? What does walkable mean? Our MDP talks about multiplex sites, so destination recreation facilities. And then we hear the community saying, but we want to have things that we can walk to. And we use Central Park as a good example, because that is a multi-program space with different, year-round amenities in that space that our community largely said, we want to have something to walk to. I don't want to have to drive all the time when I want to look for a recreation amenity. So what is the health value of that? We are working right now through asset management program within our department, and we are looking at the health component of how do you put some dollar value to that, because the money that we put into park spaces, we don't see a financial return on that directly. We indirectly do, because people move to the community and say, I want to live in a community and I'm going to pay my taxes and I'm going to have a property here because it's got what I want to go and relocate to that community. So that certainly is a component of it. It is more challenging to do that, to put the health component into it. I'll say that.
But you plan to?
Yes.
Okay. I also had a question about item 6.3.8 on page 89. Continuing to encourage private enterprise to collaborate with the city. How are you defining private enterprise in that?
Thank you, Your Worship. So it really encompasses the groups where we see for-profit businesses that run recreation facilities. They'll run niche clubs, like you'll have we have axe throwing in our community. We have all kinds of really unique things that you can have that are maybe considered a for-profit business. Some of them may be considered for-profit, but also we've got nonprofit groups. They're not city-run. And so we see entities that are not run by the city. In some cases, we have partnership agreements where they maybe lease land, or we've got spaces that they're utilizing within current facilities or different arrangements like that. But then there are groups that really have survived on their own and they do their own thing. And those are groups that we want to engage with those groups stronger, because a historical view would have been just city programs, city facilities, YMCA, you do your own thing, and really not be collaborative. And that's, we're all looking for a piece of the same pie, and whether that's through programs and day camps and areas that we can collaborate better with groups that are some for-profit, non-for-profit. We know that there's organizations that utilize private spaces for swimming lessons. That takes some of the demand from the community and addresses that. And that's, our view needs to be at a higher level about what recreation is offered in the community for residents, for attraction, but for also resident health and well-being. Whether we offer it or not, we need to have a view of that we can collaborate with these groups instead of maybe a potentially more historic view, not just in our community, but historic view that we're competing with each other.
Thank you. I just have two more. When you say something like, well, that it's old because it was built in like the 1960s or whatever, it does raise a question for me of why some countries have buildings and facilities that last, over 100 years, and we are struggling to keep ours alive for 60.
Thank you, Worship. So you've asked a question I've asked before. And, you see other countries where they have, celebrated history, and we don't have the same type of history of building materials. And we don't build with stone, and we don't build with things that last hundreds of years. I mean, our facilities are typically a 50, 60-year lifespan before you're looking at, do we replace it now? You could keep it going indefinitely, but over time, you're going to replace every element of the facility. So it becomes more costly as the facility gets older. It's really more of a facilities question than mine, but it certainly is. It's not how we construct facilities, and I think we're moving towards more sustainable facilities, like for water capture and energy, and that's positive. But we're not where you see 100 and 150-year-old facilities, not in our country.
Will that be part of the business plan and economic analysis?
Just for clarification, Your Worship, what component as far as making facilities last longer or the environmental focus?
Well, both, I guess, but the environmental focus, but more so, does investing more in a building up front to make it last longer and make sure that we have a plan for maintaining it and having the replacement capital that we need going forward, is that going to be part of the economic analysis?
Thank you, Your Worship. So certainly how we make facilities last longer. There are components. The thing with rec facilities is there's a lot of components that go over time. So we know ice slabs, typically they're a 30-year ice slab before you replace it. That's where you use ammonia for chilling the slab, and then you would freeze up water on there. Those components go over time. The longer they go, you end up with more leaks and situations where there's a safety element. There are certainly checks and balances in place to make those components last longer. Would not be a City of Medicine Hat decision. It would be that's how ice facilities are kept going. So we know chillers are typically 15 years before they're replaced. It's not the whole building, but that's a component of it. Ice slabs, 30 years. We know there's a larger ticket item, so we know that's usually $1.2, $1.5 million for an ice slab. The physical structures would be more of a facilities question, but the environmental component, we see that as having more efficient buildings, and that's certainly a component of it for sure.
Okay, I would see the slab and the ice making facilities to be maintenance that we would have to do, not so much the building lasting longer. That's just the the replacement cost of those things. The sanitary conditions item, it's on page 85, A6. I guess I'm wondering, this is immediate, so design of new facilities and renovation of existing ones should provide larger change rooms, improved sanitation, and washing. I don't know what that means. Air filtration systems and inclusive washrooms. So for the larger change rooms, does that provide value for money? Improved sanitation and washing, what does that mean?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we know that equipment is bigger than it was before, so we have hockey teams that can't fit in a change room, and so we know that's a problem. We know we don't have gender-neutral bathrooms. We know that we have a male-female mix on teams where we have the lesser number of people on the team. I don't mean it's necessarily female or male, but the smaller number of people are changing in a space that was a closet area before, a storage area. So those are things to address. Now, do we put money into that and addressing those in our current facility? Or do we look at, as we look at our analysis of potentially replacing facilities, is that what we include? As you need to make sure that there are ways to address keeping areas clean. The sanitation wasn't as big of a concern in the design of the facilities, but we know that air ventilation systems, we know that coming through a pandemic, certainly wash stations, access to sanitizing areas, those are important. I believe we saw this as a best practice for when we're moving forward with any type of design, whether it's a design of a new facility or if it's a renovation of an existing facility. I just want to mention too that the previous comment around we need to plan for capital for maintaining facilities. We do, but the capital is getting larger. So we have plans to 2050 for the facilities. It's just, it may look like, well, how do we get to a spot where we've got all this capital in front of us? And a lot of that over the next 20, 29 years, 28 years, it's front loaded. And so we see a bunch of that happening in the next few years. And really what we wanted to do is say, are we okay putting that money into these older facilities, or should we really look at the whole chessboard and say, maybe we need to start consolidating? If we don't, and we say, let's keep what we have, we'll put the money into existing facilities, we can keep them going. They're not in a state where we say, well, they're too far gone. It's just that they require a lot of money to keep them going.
I appreciate that. Councillor Knodel.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. Through the chair. My question was a bit of a piggyback on Mayor Clark's question about community wellness and indicators of health in communities and neighborhood facilities, because it's a common value, I think, of many of us on council. Would you see increased density in a neighborhood as not an indicator, but as something that would promote the likelihood that we may be able to see more resources within a smaller amount of space over time?
Through the chair, so that certainly is a factor. So when we look at rec centers, so larger rec centers typically serve a 5-kilometer radius as kind of a catchment area. When you look at a neighborhood, and I'm just gonna steal Robert's your definition, so I appreciate some of the work and the conversations that we've had, but we look at a neighborhood as about 2,500 people. We look at a community as about 4 neighborhoods. When you look at if we talked about a neighborhood pool, and we said we value having those within a neighborhood, 2,500 is not enough population to support that. So we have to take something with a greater view, which means not everyone will have a pool within a really short walking distance. And we don't have that now. We know the South residential sector doesn't have that. We know lots of areas don't have it. We know in Crescent Heights, we have Heights Pool that's down now, and we don't foresee any immediate opening, but as far as an option, it is an option that we'll put in front of council. So as far as increasing density of neighborhoods, it's really from what can be supported, the population is going to be a big driver. So if you have 10,000 people in an area, that's likely going to support a pool or an outdoor amenity or a smaller rec center. When you look at where you drive to, kind of the analogy I've used is mailboxes to malls, right? So mailboxes, you need to be able to walk to those, and they're low-cost items. But a mall, that's not something that you're going to have as a walkable amenity because of the large capital investment into it. And you look at it and say the smaller rec facilities, though, but they're more affordable for residents. But that's potentially a policy issue for us. And when we look at the cost per resident going to it, it's actually more efficient to go to a larger center. It's about 2/3 the cost of it, of going to a smaller center with lower utilization. So like going to Calgary, it's cheaper to take your own car than to drive a bus. But if you put everybody on the bus, it's cheaper per person to take the bus. That's really the mentality behind more destination facilities. But as far as walkability and health and wellness, there's nothing that said it had to be a rec center that people have to walk to. They have to have something to be able to walk to. And our view is we have a lot of outdoor spaces that are not necessarily programmed and not utilized very well in the community. And that's where we should be putting our focus with our community groups, and how do we increase utilization of those spaces that already exist, and some of them are low-cost investments or lower-cost investments. We're going to have a very large pump track, and that's really in line with, it's not a walkable amenity, but it's really in line for a lower cost than building a rec center. Those are ideas that we can do in neighborhoods, and say those are things that people can walk to and take their bikes. Connecting our trail system. We've got two communities around us. We've got Red Cliff, we have Dunmore, that residents, that there's a trail connectivity that we could potentially look at pursuing. There's lots of ways where we can look at keeping people active, having things that they can walk to, but doesn't necessarily have to be bricks and mortar.
One more. I'm going to ask an answered question again. I am just wondering if for this report there was, because I don't think there was a review of how built environment impacts mental and physical health for the purpose of this study.
Yeah, sorry, thank you, Your Worship. I was just looking to confirm with Scott. Our consultant, we did start with a literature review for this. It wasn't our major focus, but where you look at placement, so if you're looking at saying the decision is we have to start replacing a facility, and where's your placement? Then you talk about accessibility. So if we say, well, they have to be spread out because people can't get to them, is that a true issue or is it a transit issue? Is it an issue where we can say, well, but we can solve that. We can get people to facilities if that's the only issue. If we said we have to have more facilities because people have to walk, and that's what we're okay paying for, we know that it costs us more money per person going in, which means that tax dollars subsidize the entry fee for people going into those facilities if they're more spread out. So as far as the health and wellness component, there was an element that was reviewed when we went through the plan with our consultant. And certainly as we're looking at the facility decisions, whether it's repair or replace, that will be a component of it as well.
Did AHS have an opportunity to review this?
So, Your Worship, we didn't engage with AHS directly on this. We are engaging with them on our asset management plan. So how we make decisions, they're really largely around the health focus, around asset management, planning spaces.
And to reiterate, by voting yes, I'm not agreeing to a multiplex.
That's correct.
Seeing no more questions, thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sharps.
I just had a quick question, James. I've gone through this document a few times, but it's long. So quick summary. Did all the recommendations the citizens came in with, are your recommendations or the plan's recommendations mimic that? Or is there any areas that are not in line with the responses, sorry?
Through the chair, so where we get to walkability was into our facilities presentation, which I know we're not going to go to tonight. There were elements where we heard, I want to walk to something, where started off really was recreation amenities. And so where we're saying, keeping in line with our municipal development plan, that's an area that we see, well, how do we reconcile this? Because we have half our community that can't walk to anything. And so for us to say that our current structure, it's okay for us to keep our current structure if we're consciously going to keep that. But it isn't in line with residents saying, I want to be able to walk to something. Now, that could be a more programmed park space. When we dug into the issue more with residents, largely heard, I need to be able to walk to something. And I need a trail system, I need playgrounds, we have a playground management strategy, we have a trail or a playground typically within 800 to 1,000 meters from every home in Medicine Hat. That's what we use for a standard. And trail connectivity is what we're working on, increasing that. That would be the component that we've seen the biggest, how do we reconcile where we heard from residents we want to be able to walk to an amenity, which started out as a recreation amenity. And so does that mean a facility? Because we can't afford that. We can't have within 800 meters of every home a recreation amenity. We can't have access to a trail space. We can have access to park spaces that are programmed better. And so that's where I would see the biggest, maybe viewed as a disconnect.
So it sounds like there's still more community consultation to do around that piece then, and educating them on why we can't do something or doing something different. And then my second to that question is, if we've got an aging demographic, is there value in playgrounds every 800s? I don't use them, so.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yeah, so we do have an aging demographic, and we see that having playgrounds that are smaller playgrounds with just a slide are not well utilized. I know my kids when they were younger certainly wanted to go to a destination playground, so there's more to do there. How we're reconciling this with the community, so we're moving into the facilities area, and that's really where we can talk about facilities. I don't have all that information with me today. I could certainly
You're off the
present on
hook.
that.
Thank you.
But how do we reconcile it? It comes to the decision that we put in front of council that says, here's all your options. And all your options are you can reinvest in existing facilities, you can maintain, you can say status quo with some facilities that are closed, like Heights Pool. All of those will be options that we put in front of council with the net present value impact for that, where we can value the health impact for our community, but then also the pros and cons with that. So what does that mean? If we don't address some of the south residential sector, what we heard through our engagement was how do we address some of that? And that will be some of the options that we put forward. We can maintain existing as an option. Those will all be put forward as options in front of council. So we're not saying we're absolutely going to. We can say with a reasonable level of certainty, we know there are operating cost reductions by consolidating facilities. We know that from the ice surface. We have to do more refinement around that. We could build another pool that's like for like, and we could reduce our operating costs. Probably won't be what the community needs, and we'll probably see similar utilization for what we see at our lap pools right now. But we could do that. That's an option. So those are all options that we'll put in front of council through our facilities plan with the pros and cons and as much financial information, economic impact, and health data that we can.
All right, thank you. Seeing no further questions, can I get a motion to accept the presentation for information?
I'll make a motion to accept the presentation.
I'll second.
We'll vote. It's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have item 9.1, Parks and Recreation Master Plan for adoption.
I'll move the Parks and Rec Master Plan for adoption.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. We're working on it. It's unanimous.
For the record, Counselor Sharps, how would you have voted for the last one? Yes, thank you. Next, we have item 6.4, 2022 Assessment Role Overview from Sue Sturkenberg, City Assessor.
Welcome, City Assessor Sturkenberg. You have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship, City Council, and administrators, and the thinning public. Assessment notices have begun arriving in the mail, and our ratepayers may have questions as far as their assessed values. And I'd like to provide information how assessment values have typically changed from 2021 to 2022. Declare assessment role, that means that we have met the quality standards set by the provincial legislation and regulations. Notices were mailed last Wednesday. The complaint deadline is clearly marked on the assessment notice, outlined in a red box. The tax notices are expected to arrive on May 20th, and tax payment due date June 30th. There's also an option of a monthly payment plan by setting up a monthly withdrawal by contacting the Customer Care and Billing main floor City Hall, which divides the tax amount over 12 months. It's all tricky. Apologies. The 2022 budget has been approved by City Council at $80.78 million last December, and our assessment values that have been prepared provide the basis for distributing the tax dollars to the taxpayers. Mass appraisal approach is used to establish the market value, as well as we have regulated rates for a small number of properties. And I'd like to just highlight the changes to the assessment rule. The revenue neutral that term is really regardless of the change in the assessment base, the same amount of tax revenue will be collected. Real assessment base, we're looking at both market growth and physical growth. And NR is non-residential, so we did see a loss in non-residential, and non-residential includes commercial industrial properties. We saw very little physical growth to non-residential properties, very few building permits in 2021, and market loss was experienced in the hospitality industry, being the hardest hit by the lockdowns and capacity restrictions in the last 2 years. MF is multifamily, and there is a growth in the assessment base of $25.6 million. The SF was single-family dwellings, really had the largest growth in assessment in both physical and market growth of $248.4 million. So our estimated total revenue, tax revenue, has grown in 0.47%, so it's about 0.25%. And when we look at the 2021 assessment base, we are at $9.019 billion. And our 2022 assessment base, $9.255 billion. And so that is still subject to any revisions or changes that could take place before we set the tax rate bylaw here in the next month. Our total number of properties, just over 29,000. That includes both taxable and exempt properties. When we look at residential and farmland, that's 90% of our properties. Multifamily, 5 units or more, is 0.6%, and non-residential, commercial, industrial, 9.6%. When we look at median, that is really the midpoint of the frequency of our distribution. We line up our non-residential properties from smallest to largest, and the midpoint is the median. And that's really gives us a better representation of overall what was the change, rather than an average, which could be skewed by the large changes and large decreases. Commercial, we saw very little change, having a stable percent for the median change of 0. When we look at non-residential, we break it down between commercial, which really, again, stable at 0%. So we do have properties that are increasing and decreasing. Industrial median, overall decrease of 1.4%. And when we look at those categories, we're seeing very little change in our lease rates, a slight increase in the vacancy, and with industrial, about 0.25% increase in capitalization rates. And when we determine those capitalization rates, we're looking at 3 years of sales. So we've got we found this year we had a slight increase of the number of sales used in our analysis. So we're looking from July 2018 to June 2021.
City Assessor Sturkenberg, can you give a quick definition of capitalization rates, please?
I sure can. We look at sales. We have the net operating income. I just have it's really capitalizing the net operating income and calculating out a present value, or determining that present income and what that future value of that property is. Also taking into account the risk that's involved, the tax laws, and bringing forward into the current market value. Hotel motels, we experienced a decrease in that category, and that's been the hardest hit industry. And 2 main factors really affected that value. It was a combined factor of the occupancy sharply declining and a decrease in the average daily rent rate, and that dropped the revenue per available room. The second factor was the increase in expenses, and some of those expenses could be controlled, while others were fixed rates, really out of the control of management. Multifamily, 5 units or more, we did see an increase of 7.7%, and again remains a strong market with the sales. When we looked at the typical sales in 2022 for apartment buildings, we saw that that ranged at about $112,000 per unit, whereas our assessments are sitting at about $91,800. So as I had mentioned in Assessment 101 a few months ago, that we had talked about income-producing properties. The information that we get is through a request for information that we send out to property owners, and we ask them for their lease rates, their expenses, and vacancies. Single-family homes saw an increase of 3.3%, and that's consistent with what we saw in a news article in January 2022. The Medicine Hat Real Estate Board reporting an increase of 4% in Medicine Hat, with an average price of about $302,000 for single-family property. Triplex and fourplex, we also saw an increase very similar to single-family at 3.2%. Residential condominiums, and those are individually titled condominiums, increase of 3.3%, and manufactured homes, increase of 5%. The majority of our inquiries and appeals come from commercial industrial properties, and that's why we wanted to highlight here the distribution of those changes with the non-residential properties. So those are the income-producing properties. With a total of 1,094 properties, so those did not include any that had permit changes. we saw pretty well an equal distribution on either side of our median. And I've had a question in the past about, is the median always 0%? In the last 3 years, we have found that it has been fairly flat, that the majority, the midpoint or the median of our properties have had very little change. We've had properties increasing and decreasing. So the amount that are decreasing for 2022 are 562. And that's just slightly up from last year, which we had, or slightly down from last year, where we had 691 properties decreasing in 2021. If we look at the number of properties within 15% of the median, 89% of our properties fall within that range. Within 10% of the median, 73% of our accounts. So some of the reasons for the increase or decrease in assessment, we've got some shifting of lease rates. Overall, they have remained fairly constant, but there are some pockets that may have shifted. We're seeing an increase in vacancy, slight increase in vacancy. And when we look at vacancy, we're looking at those properties that have reported no occupancy and that are actively listed for rent or for leasing. Our non-recoverables have increased by 1%, so that's to recognize an additional cost incurred during the pandemic. And cap rates mostly steady. Some properties or some pockets of properties have adjusted based on the sales in the last 3 years. When we look at residential properties, that's the majority of our properties. That represents the largest assessment class, so 90% of our properties. We see that all residential neighborhoods are falling within 0.3%, a negative 0.3% to 7% increase. So we look at each neighborhood and find the median within each of those neighborhoods. In 2021, our office sent out 2,200 surveys to 8 neighborhoods, to residential property owners, to give them a hand in responding back as far as the details of their home, if there's been any recent renovations, basement finish. In 2022, we'll be sending out 3,500 surveys beginning of April. And that is really based on the provincial government recommendation for us to review our properties every 5 years. So that's about 20% each year. Unless there's building permits, then we're reviewing the property within the current year. And a supplementary notice, a second notice, will be sent to those that experience new construction or occupy new construction during the year, and that's prorated for the number of months from completion.
Before you move on, oh, dang it, I just missed it. What are the green neighborhoods? I know that there's the decreases, but what, do you know what neighborhoods those are?
So the river, the furthest north one is just north of the river. The Division Avenue is the line, so it's going to be northeast. And the other one would be in the flats. And probably, and I'm not offhand, I'm just not sure the street addresses within that, but would be within the southeast.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Knodel?
I had a similar question. Thank you, Mayor Clark. Through the chair, I was curious about the misfortune of Southridge Crescent and the one other neighborhood. Inform me, please. I'm just curious. If you know anything, I understand there's multiple variables when you're assessing properties, but do you know if there's just a general, was there a bunch of renovations that happened in that area, or?
And we're really within a very close amount, from 0% to 7%. So the neighborhood next to that Southridge Crescent is at 4.9 or 5%, and this one's at 6. So we're within 1% of each other. It can really depend on the sales that have taken place within our time period. So we're looking at our assessments, how do they compare to the sales?
Your Worship, may I ask a question?
Yes,
Sorry.
my apologies, Councillor
That's fine.
Dunowski. I see it now.
City Assessor Sturkenberg. So I asked this question at committee, and I think it's one of those things things that community will find interesting, because I didn't know the answer, but obviously the gray lines or black lines are street delineations, but I did ask, some of them anyway, why some segments are larger, some are smaller, et cetera, and I believe your answer, and therefore are assessed in those, in those vast areas, or small areas accordingly. So I live at the very, very, very tip of Ross Glen and Taylor there, and I can see I get a 3.9% increase, and it's delineated by some of the streets are, and then you could extrapolate that same commentary across the city. My question is then, why would there be a large area of 2.9%, another very, very small area with an increase of 3.9, et cetera? And I think you said, and I hopefully heard you correctly, that it had to do with similar developments or timelines associated with those areas, therefore they're delineated as such. Is that still the case?
That has been our goal, and when we're looking at mass appraisal, we're stratifying those groups of similar type comparable properties and grouping them together within those neighborhoods. And some of those neighborhoods were when the development was first started, or we're trying to group those similar comparable neighborhoods.
And I'm not bring that up because I'm challenging that theory. I did test it though. I did go look at the city website and look at it, and you're absolutely correct. So more or less there were developments in large swoops, if you will, and therefore have very similar market conditions and sales data. So I just wanted to validate that because I was, after seeing this a million times, I was not certain around that, but I wanted to gain the understanding of that, and so I thought I'd pass it on through questioning you here. Thank you.
Okay, our timelines for key events, the assessment values reflect market value as of July 1st, 2021. And we look at the condition and characteristics of the property as of December 31st, December 2020. The assessment notice has been sent in the mail last week with our complaint date 60 days from the notice of assessment date, May 24th. And annual tax notice will be May 20th, so that we've got a bit of an overlap there. I also want to note that we're seeing a delay in receiving new ownerships through Alberta land titles. And so up to 3 to 4 months, not having received those property sales or the title transfers from up to last December. I'd strongly encourage any new property owners that have not received their 2022 assessment notice this week to either go to the city website and they can go to the assessment map and see their assessment value, or they can contact the assessment or the customer care department, provide proof of ownership with a purchase agreement, copy of the purchase agreement to show that they are the owner, so that they can obtain a copy of their assessment notice. And then at the end of October, supplementary tax assessment notices will be mailed. With our complaint hearings, we've showed the last 3 years here, and once the property owners review their assessment notice, if they have questions, we ask and invite them to contact the assessment department for property details. They also have the right to appeal their assessment if they do not agree with their assessment value. If the property owner has not responded to a request for information that we have sent, they may lose their right to appeal. This chart here shows appeals from the last 3 years, and in 2021 we had 38 appeals, down from 2020 at 66 and 2019 at 37. So we range anywhere between 35 to 60 or 70 appeals, fluctuating based on whatever the change in the assessment value could be. In 2021, some of the issues with the appeals were with hospitality properties. We also had larger retail enclosed malls, power centers, and big box retail. And their issues were again looking at the income approach, the vacancy rates, lease rates, and cap rates. So when adjustments are made to assessments through the appeal board or through mutual agreement with the property owner and the assessment department, when they bring forward information, if we find that we have there's warrant a change to the assessment. Last year in 2021, there was 31 of them. Then that gets redistributed back to the other property owners in the next year. There were 2 appeals that were withdrawn with no change to the assessment, and 5 appeals went forward to the Assessment Review Board, with 2 being upheld and 3 experiencing changes. Fees to file a complaint for a residential that's 3 units or less is $50, but it is reduced to $40 if they appeal within the first 30 days of receiving their notice. All other property is $650 with a reduced rate to $520 if they appeal within the 30 days.
I have one more question. If someone feels surprised by their assessment notice or is wondering, needs some explanation, before they appeal, they should reach out to your department. I just want to clarify that that's an acceptable route to take.
Your worship, exactly. We do encourage property owners to inquire, and we can provide them with the property details. So we do ask that they call our department, or they can look online for information. They can also email us for information. This year, we're excited that we've got, when property owners request their property details, we have an online form, and this is the first year that we've had that available, that they can fill out the form and it'll come to our department. We'll respond within 15 days so that they can receive their details. There's a $45 fee if they're looking at comparable property, and they can make those payments online for those. It is recommended to first contact the assessment department before appealing, because some of those questions that they have may be answered beforehand, so we do invite them to call. We had some property owners experience some changes over 30%, and there was 38 calls that were made by staff just to notify those property owners. And some of those changes could have been that there was missing details in prior assessments that needed to be added in, or two accounts that were combined to one. So there's some varying reasons there. We also included a letter with assessment notices for property that were experiencing an increase over 20. And there was about 430 letters that we sent out. So again, we do invite property owners to contact our department to see what the change was and what it was for. We do have a lot of information on our city website. We've got an assessment map, which is interactive. If you haven't had a chance to take a look, we invite you to do that. You can zoom in, see your property as well as neighboring properties. For residential property, we have some additional details such as age or size, just so that you know what you're comparing to. And for non-residential multifamily properties, we just have the assessment value. Also, there's documents on our website, and it's called the Methodology Explanation, and it explains how assessments have been prepared, and those are for more of the income-producing properties such as commercial, industrial, multifamily, hotel, motel. We haven't placed those on the website as of this date, but they'll be on there this week. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any other questions?
Great job. Oh, Councillor Dumanowski.
Your worship, excuse me, no questions, but I like to take the opportunity each time we have this to kind of speak to the whole process, the integrity of the process. Some of the common themes that I hear from people is around the validity factor of assessment and market value, and some of the confusion around how different non-residential properties are valued over residential, and how ultimately it derives to an assessment notice. And I can tell you, and certainly the public, that the process is guided by provincial government, by municipal affairs, and ultimately we have, as a municipality, have the need to assess and put out the role. But ultimately, the distribution of properties, and I think I had a slide 8, it won't make you go back, but, and I said this at committee as well, the median happened to be 0, and you said it was a coincidence, but I recall a few years ago, a representative from Municipal Affairs came at council's request to stand right where you are and talk about the role, and, you know, because there were some changes that had occurred prior to that gave cause to a lot of community concerns and questions, but I recall their commentary around if there's a nice distribution, I'm going to call it an equal distribution on either side of the median, or as much as you can achieve naturally, an equal distribution, that is indicative of a good, solid assessment role. And that will always mean, and because some people look at it, there are some properties that are down incrementally from 5% to 30%, and others that are up. And that kind of visual can be alarming to a lot of people, but it is a natural reality, especially in non-residential, due to a number of variables that you spoke to, not the least of which COVID and cap rates and others. So as complex as it is, I'm just here, don't take my word, but take your word, quite frankly, and you've done a great job in this and educating the public that there is a very wholesome and fair process going on here. But what I like is that you do outline that there are opportunities for people who feel their assessment is incorrect or has suddenly gone up, maybe in some cases down suddenly, and are concerned by that. They have the opportunity to reach out. And my last comment is around not only mailing out the assessment notice, which we all got, I got mine, but there are phone calls for those who are experiencing a higher increase. So there is that very unusually incredible personal connection, which it takes a lot of courage because those people probably aren't necessarily happy, but there's a person-to-person opportunity to ask and answer any questions they have. And also letters for those who are experiencing a slightly higher increase, but not quite there. So suffice to say, my commentary is that I believe in the process. I've been around to see a lot of flux in this process and community concern. There always is when you're dealing with assessment and taxation, but I appreciate the education component as much as the integrity of the whole process that you bring to this I guess presentation tonight. And again, if you are at home and you got your assessment notice and you have questions, reach out. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And can I have a motion to accept the?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Next, we have item 7.1, an Energy and Infrastructure Committee meeting of March the 3rd, 2022 for information.
Your worship, we need to vote on our last, no kidding.
Thank you, Councillor Dumanowski. It's unanimous. Okay, so now item 7.1, Energy and Infrastructure Committee meeting dated March 3rd, 2021. All items are for information.
So moved.
Second, sorry, my mic wasn't working.
Councillor Hirsch?
Well, I just love the innovation that's going on with staff in terms of the drinking water. It's a really good news story that there's a lot of neat thinking out there that is not costing the taxpayers a lot of money, but it actually solves a lot of maybe some social challenges or drinking water for sure for some of these stuff. So I guess my kudos to staff for their ingenuity as it speaks here. So thank you very much. That's excellent.
Yeah, I echo that on behalf of all of council. We really appreciate the innovation that's going on with staff, seeing a problem and solving it. That's incredible. Seeing no more Questions or comments? We will vote. That's unanimous. Moving on to item 7.2, the Corporate Services Committee meeting, March 10th, 2022. All items are for information.
So moved.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. That's unanimous. Next up is item 7.3, Council Employee Committee meeting dated March 15th, 2022. All items are for information.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. Go for it.
Just with regards to the two positions, so just confirm with me that the positions have been out in the public? Are they,
No, not yet.
Okay.
We have job descriptions and but they have not been posted yet.
so is it going to be posted on the city's website in addition to, or what's the circulation of the postings?
I believe that one of them, they will both be posted on the city's website.
Okay.
But then we might use a different strategy for each of them in terms of where else we're posting it or who
Okay.
we're having, like there may be a headhunter involved,
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Sorry, yeah, we just kind of talked about that as an aside, so thank you.
That's unanimous. And next, item 7.4, Administrative Committee meeting dated March 16th, 2022. And there's one item and it's for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. That's unanimous. Moving on to item 8, reports for reception. 8.1, Municipal Planning Commission dated January 26th, 2022.
So moved?
Second.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. That's unanimous. Item 8.2, Police Commission meeting dated February 24th, 2022. That's item 8.2.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Councilor Dumanowski?
Strangely, just have a small question. I see on the agenda, there's a conflict of interest declaration after the land acknowledgement. And then it does indicate none. So is that a standing expectation at Police Commission that there will be a conflict of interest and therefore it becomes a standing line item? I'm just curious.
Through the chair. So yes, they're not an expectation, but just the decision was made by Police Commission that it would be a standard part of the start of every meeting to ask if there was a conflict regarding any of the items in that meeting. I don't know that it came out of any specific thing, but just a decision made by the commission that that would be kind of a standing part of the agenda.
I will note that is a standing part of a few other agendas that I've seen, just to make sure that if there are any conflicts of interest that need to be declared, they get declared. Often there won't be any, but it's just to make sure that you don't accidentally stumble upon something or through something where there's a conflict. Seeing no further questions or comments, we'll vote. That's unanimous. And finally, having dealt with item 9.1 and 10.1 already, we're moving to item 12.1, Annual Development Statistics 2021 for information.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, we will vote. Thank you. Can I get a motion to move into closed?
I will move to move into closed.
Second.
Thank you. The open portion of the meeting is adjourned.